It is Monday, March 30th, and we are ready for history. Let's sing our president song before we get started. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk and Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant and Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower. I'm going to repeat that. Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford. Go back to Hoover. Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford. Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton. Bush, Obama, and Donald Trump. Okay, I hope you got it. Good. Keep working on it. I tried to slow down a little bit so that you could stay with me. All right, today we are moving on with number 23, the kind of intermission between the two Cleveland presidencies, Benjamin Harrison. Benjamin was president between 1889 and 1893. He was a Republican, and his vice president was Levi Morton, and he was often called the human iceberg. Some other nicknames for him were Little Ben, but human iceberg was because of his kind of chilly demeanor. He was known to be kind of quiet, kind of gruff, not like super friendly guy. He was just kind of plain, okay? Now, this is a house I was able to visit. We went at a cool time. We went last year right around 4th of July, and that's why it is decorated the way that it was. And I was really sad. I wanted to go one day earlier, but we just couldn't get up early enough to make it there in time. But this is in Indianapolis, Indiana, and had we been able to make it earlier, they had a, it's called a naturalization ceremony. So for people who had come from other countries that have gone through all of the requirements to become an American citizen, they have a ceremony that these people attend, and they're sworn in. They take a pledge, they take an oath as an American citizen. And so all of the people that would have been there would have been would have gone through that whole process and finally approved. And it takes years, lots of money, lots of time, lots of study. They have to know a lot about American history. We had some friends that went through the process also here. And so they had a really cool service there, and I was so sad. Things were still set up for it and everything, but we missed it. We weren't able to make it. But I would like to try to get to one of those one day. But they have one, I think they said every year on the 4th of July there. So these pictures, some of these, not this one here, but are from our visit to the house. This was one of his campaign like banners. Protection to home industry is what it says. This is one of Miss Harrison's fans that would have been very fashionable at the time. And then I thought this was cool. I love this. That's why I took a picture of it. It was his home gym. So if you see there, you've got like these bowling pin type things, and they were weighted, and so he would throw those around. Different sized weights. This thing was kind of like a pulley thing that he pulled out of the cabinet and helped strengthen. So he was, they said that he liked this, that he liked to stay in shape, and he was a healthy man. So I thought that was kind of neat, because I don't think we think of people in the 1800s having a home gym, and but they would have, but that's what it would have looked a little bit different than what we have now. Okay, so you should have your kind of introductory material written down now. Okay, First Lady. Miss Caroline Scott. Um, one thing that I read said that she is probably one of the most kind of overlooked first ladies. That one reason I think is because it was only one term, and he's not a very notable president. He's not someone that a lot of people talk about. He was known to be a little bit inactive. He had very little office hours. He tried to work until about noon, and then he liked to play with his grandchildren who lived at the White House. But I don't think it's noted just how much that Caroline did and how much her presence kind of helped him. She was raised by a minister and founder of a female school, the Oxford Female Institute. And so her family really prized education. And so she was given an education right alongside her brothers. She was well educated. She enjoyed playing the piano. She was a very talented pianist, and she loved to draw and paint. When we were at the house, there was lots of her work on the walls, so things that she had painted during her time in the White House. Specifically, she got really interested in painting china, so like plates and cups, and so they had some of her painted china in the house also that we got to see. She was fun. She was friendly. She contrasted her husband's kind of chilly demeanor. He was real hard to get to know and really quiet, and she was kind of the opposite. And she enjoyed doing fun things with him. When they got to know each other and started dating, she kind of pulled him out. She's one of the first ladies in a while that agreed with dancing and had dancing back in the White House, which is kind of interesting because her father was a minister, but she didn't see any problem with dancing. And a lot of people at the time did, but she didn't. And so she would take him out dancing, and she would kind of encourage him to be social. She was active in her church and in many other charities as well. I think she was involved in raising money for orphanages and other causes. This picture, this is from the house. This is her First Lady portrait. And this one was commissioned to be done by the Daughters of the American Revolution. It says, First President General, presented October 13th, 1938. So this was much later that this painting was given to the family. But she was the first president of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And we talked about the DAR when we read the Grandma Dowdle books. And so this was an organization that I believe was started to do some good. It was, Caroline, I don't think, would have been happy with kind of what it turned into in some ways, like what Grandma talked about, where it was just giving women an excuse to have something that they were a part of that could be exclusive. Like, I'm a part of this group and you can't be a part of this group. Caroline was part of the founding of it because she wanted to do some good with the organization. And so she was one of the first presidents, and I have that on the next slide of this organization. Okay, so in the White House, she designed the White House china pattern. I believe theirs is this one here with the eagle, and I think it had maybe corn in its tail. Oh, no, the corn is around the side, I think. And she pulled out former presidential china and actually put it on display. So she found the china that had been kind of stuffed away and put in boxes that the other presidents had used and had designed for their time during the White House, and pulled that out and displayed it as part of the historical record. These two were done by her also in a study of birds, and I think there might be a little description or a poem here on them, and those were also done by her. She had actually a well-known china painter come over and give her lessons, and then come with her to the White House also to try to teach her how to do this well. And so she became pretty good at it. So I have here, this is where I mentioned that she was the first president of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which became known as the DAR. And then actually sad because she seems as a very healthy, kind of outgoing, kind of doing stuff person. She gets tuberculosis while her husband's president, and she dies in 1892 before his term ends in the White House. And her daughter actually serves as hostess for the rest of the time, because her daughter was there already living with the grandchildren and knew about the house already. Remember, pause this if you need to get the notes down. Okay, now more about Benjamin Harrison. Now, he comes from a family that is well known, that is what I would call entrenched in history. You could trace his ancestors back to having to being very useful to our country from the very beginning. And I think because of this, he grew up with this sense of that he was going to do something important and that he was going to be someone important. I think that can and probably did and sometimes come across arrogant, but I think it was probably very similar to John Quincy Adams in the fact that if your family has played such an important role, then you feel like it is your job, like it is your duty to do something important, and that you want to continue that legacy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's wrong with the idea that my family has been important to this nation and I want to continue to be important. Now, if you have this idea that you are the only ones that can do it, then I don't agree with that. And I don't necessarily think that that's the way he was either. I think that he had this very big sense of history from his family. It would be the same way with, think about growing up. We have two George Bushes that were president. So we have the father and then the son. And then think about those children and grandchildren that are still growing up now, and think about how they must feel, that they have a sense of dedication to their country that maybe others may not feel because of the important part that their families have played in history. So I think we see that in his life. His great-grandfather was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And then his grandfather, he is a grandson of William Henry Harrison. So his father plays an interesting part too. His father was a congressman, but his father was the only person that was a son and a father to a president. Isn't that interesting? He was a son and a father to a president, because this is the only grandfather-grandson duo that we have in history so far. Okay, so his father was a congressman, though. It wasn't like his father was a do-nothing. His father did have a farm in Ohio, and Benjamin grows up in some ways as a farm boy, but not a poor farm boy. He grew up on a farm, and he grew up doing all the chores and being outside and knowing how to deal with the animals, and he loved being around animals, and I think he enjoyed being outside. But this was not log cabin people. This was not people that didn't have enough money to eat, okay? But this was a successful farm, and he grew up knowing how to do that. But he also grew up well educated by tutors at home and sent away at some parts to have a better education. And then when the Civil War comes around, he serves in the Civil War, and during the Civil War is promoted to a brigadier general. And then after the Civil War, in my reading, I found it interesting that before the Civil War, he was starting to get successful and starting to get kind of occupied in his business and becoming well known, and he was ignoring his family a little bit. But after the Civil War, he had a new dedication to his family, and he actually paid more attention to them and showed more love and care to his family, which I thought was kind of an interesting point. Think about something like that and the effect that it would have on you. Hopefully, the time that we're going through right now, this crisis time in our nation, will take us out on the other side better people, that we would learn from it and change in some ways. So after the Civil War, he becomes a successful lawyer in Indiana. This sign right here is from his law office. It has his name and then his partner's names, and that came from his building. And then, okay, as presidents, he has several firsts. And I need to make a couple corrections, I think, mistakes that I have made before. I think here's two things that I think I've confused. I think sometimes I have confused Harrison and Hayes. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because they're close in history. I think their pictures are similar. I think they're close in history. I think their both names both start with the H. And I think I have also confused Caroline with James Buchanan's Harriet Lane. Because I think I told you some wrong information earlier, and in my research I was corrected. Caroline was the one that gave money to a hospital, John Hopkins Hospital, and actually insisted that they hire girls, that they admit girls into their school. And I thought I told you that Harriet Lane did that, and I think I'm incorrect on that. And then the electric lights, I might have said that wrong in another way, and I've done a little bit more research. And the Harrisons were the first ones to have electric lights put in the White House. He was the first one to go to a baseball game, and he was the first one to have a Christmas tree, which is also a little disputed. Some people say Pierce, but I got on the official White House Historical Association website today, and they said that it was Benjamin Harrison that had the first Christmas tree. And remember, I told you about the White House ornaments this year, and you all made your own. This is the one that represents Harrison, one that looks like a Christmas tree, because they were the first one to put up a Christmas tree, and it was mostly because of his grandchildren. And this represents his love for his family and his grandchildren. He enjoyed his family. Like I said, his name was Human Iceberg, but around his family, he was different, especially around his grandkids. He loved to play with them. He loved to be outside with them. They had a goat named Old Whiskers, and Old Whiskers often pulled them around in a little cart. And there's a funny story about Benjamin Harrison running down the street in front of the White House, chasing after this goat cart that was pulling his grandkids that had gotten out of the yard. During this time, even though it's after Garfield's assassination and Lincoln's, you don't have a lot of guards like we do now. The president was free to kind of leave and walk around. People came into the White House still for receptions. So it was a different time. And the president was seen in a different way too. He was seen as the people's person. And he was seen as someone who the people should have access to. You should not hide away. You should not be separate from us. You are our president. We should have access to you freely. And that is a different idea than we have now. Completely different. So to see the president running down in front of the White House chasing his grandkids in a goat cart probably was not very common, but could have happened then when it probably could not happen today. He would have his Secret Service chasing after the cart instead. And he's the last president with a beard. And remember what I've said before, these kinds of things may seem insignificant and not as important, but we're also seeing the times change. So this is the last president with facial hair here. It's kind of changing. We have several coming up with those big, kind of fuzzy, furry mustaches. And then we go to clean shaven. And it's just a sign of the times. And I think that's interesting to kind of trace history through hairdos. And you can in several different ways. You can trace history in all kinds of different ways. So there's some things as president, and we'll learn a little bit more about some of the events going on at this time next time. In the comments, again, share any information you're learning. Post any questions. You all have such wonderful questions when we do this in class, and that's part of what I miss from this. I miss being able to kind of go back and forth between your questions, even though I do believe we're doing this faster now. I do miss your questions, so as you come up with them as I'm lecturing, please write them down and please post them. I am reading your comments and I'll answer your questions. Even if it's a just what do I think or I wonder if or anything. Post your questions below. If you don't have a question, if you don't have extra information, put I saw this and I'll be sure to check it. Have a great day.